Opioids are now the biggest drug epidemic in American history.
Her husband Seth overdosed on fentanyl.
Officials estimate that 10,000 of them have become addicted to opioids like heroin and pain pills.
It wasn't so long ago that the opioid crisis was the biggest news story in America. Giant pharmaceutical companies pushed powerful new painkillers into the hands of doctors with bogus claims that they weren't addictive. We know now, of course, that they were very, very wrong. People became hooked. Hundreds of millions of pills that were more powerful than heroin flooded into communities small and large across the country. When the regulators finally caught up and stopped the flow, addicts just turned to illicit drugs instead. Images of people overdosing on the street were common on nightly news reports.
She has overdosed and is no longer breathing.
Millions of people were impacted in some way. Then the story slowly disappeared from view, but the crisis never ended. Away from the cameras, communities on the front line of the epidemic carried on fighting. West Virginia was one of the worst affected states throughout the crisis. For years it had the highest overdose rate in the country. I traveled to the state to see what the opioid crisis looked like today. Some 2 decades after the crisis began, West Virginia is still dealing with the fallout, on the streets and in the courts. The city of Huntington, surrounding Cabell County, an area often referred to as ground zero of the opioid crisis, is currently suing 3 of the biggest drug distributors in a court in the state capital of Charleston. They want around $2 billion to fix the mess they say was caused by the drug distributors flooding their communities with pills. Authorities say these drug companies should have stopped the deliveries when it became clear that abuse was rampant. Their case is based on numbers. Between 2006 and 2014, 109.8 million doses of hydrocodone and oxycodone were sent to Cabell County by drug distributors. This is a county with a population of just 90,000.
I have never known anything that was so all-consuming. It is affecting everybody in this community.
These pills flooded into small rural hamlets, into towns and into cities like Huntington. To give you an idea of the scale of the deliveries, one single pharmacy in Huntington received 35,000 doses of oxycodone in a month, 7 times the national average. In the courtroom, the drug company's defense was simple. It wasn't our job to stop the deliveries. I felt there was a lack of humanity in their answers, a coldness even. I wanted to know what the people on the receiving end of this crisis felt about what was going on in the courtroom, so I went to Huntington to find out. At a small church in East Lynn, just outside of Huntington, I sat in on a recovery meeting.
Why do you think the problem was so bad in West Virginia? It was the worst place in the country for this.
The pharmaceutical companies dumped pills in this area for years.
Yes.
And then when they took and quit prescribing the pills and filling the prescriptions, that's when heroin came in.
Traveling between the trial and between Huntington was like traveling between 2 different worlds. In the courtroom, I heard the drug company executives defend themselves, deny responsibility, and argue that they were simply fulfilling orders like any company would.
I believe H.D. Smith conducted itself responsibly and discharged its obligations.
But in East Lynn, I heard from former addicts who told me that the sheer number of pills coming into their community just changed their lives.
Yeah, you really didn't have to have any kind of proof that there was something physically wrong with you or whatever to need the pills. You just went and seen a doctor. The pill mills, they didn't even ask you anything. They would just prescribe the medication, and usually the pharmacy was there. Yeah, the pharmacy was in the same building as the doctor. It was all in one thing. You paid cash, and it was over with.
And it wasn't just those in addiction who felt the impact of these practices. It changed the entire community. I visited a homeless shelter in the center of Huntington that's on the front lines of the opioid crisis. The manager, Amanda Coleman, told me that the city was just starting to make progress when COVID hit.
It was on the streets. It was overdoses in our shelter, down the block. People would come running from 2 blocks away to ask us for help. It was people coming in and saying, I OD'd 3 times this weekend, or my friend OD'd this many times this weekend.
So it's not just that the crisis never ended, it got much worse. Huntington is suing the drug companies to force them to pay for a crisis that is still ongoing. If they win, the money would be used to pay for treatment programs and associated costs of the addiction crisis in the city. These drug companies want to put the crisis behind them, but the people of East Lynn, the people of Huntington, they can't.